The movie opens up in December 2022, showing us the protagonist, Dan Foster. He's on the phone trying to find a job. When he gets home, where a Christmas party was taking place, he asks his daughter Muri to help him out. His wife Emmy asks him to lend a hand, but he brushes her off, saying he's on an important call and was about to land his dream job at a lab. Muri receives a letter from Dan's father, but Dan quickly throws it away, expressing that he has lost his right to be a grandpa. He steps outside to finish his call, only to find out that someone else got the job, leaving him devastated. He goes back inside and sits down to watch the World Cup on TV with his daughter. Muri tells him about Selman Waksman, who discovered the tuberculosis vaccine in dirt and trash. Inspired, Dan tells her that the players on the TV are the best in the world, and she expresses her desire to be the best as well. Dan explains that to achieve greatness, one must be willing to do what others won't. Suddenly, a strange portal appears on the soccer field, and soldiers from the year 2051 emerge. They explain that Earth is being invaded by an alien race called White Spikes, and a global war is raging. The woman asks for help in fighting the war, and several months later, the world has sent military forces to the future, but only a quarter of them return. Due to the heavy losses and resource scarcity, nations have started sending civilians as troops. However, even fewer of them come back, leading to doubts about the worth of the endeavor. One day while teaching biology, Dan notices that his students were disengaged, and he asks what excites them, and only one student, Martin, raises his hand to talk about his passions for volcanoes. The other students question the point of studying since life is doomed anyway, and Dan tells them that the world needs scientists now more than ever, as it's nearly 30 years into the future. Suddenly, he receives a message on his phone asking him to confirm his draft status. Confused, he visits the nearest MEPS office, where he learns that he is to die in 7 years, making him eligible for conscription. When he tries to understand what was happening, the officials were cryptic and attach a device to his arm, informing him that it will track him and assist him in the future war. It could not be removed until his return from 2051, and Dan later tells Emmy about the situation, and she suggests that they run away from the government. Reluctant at first, Dan agrees when she mentions that it's for Muri's sake, and they meet with a man named James in an aircraft hangar, and tensions rise during their conversation. James was about to remove the device from Dan's arm when Dan realizes that James is his father. Angry and hurt, Dan storms out, instructing James never to contact Muri again. Back home, Emmy sees the device still attached to Dan's arm and feels disheartened. She tells him that he needs to inform Muri about the situation, and Dan finds Muri in the backyard and explains that he's going on a trip. Muri immediately understands that he'd been drafted and becomes sad, and Dan promises her that he will return and gives her a hug before leaving. Before they travel to the future, the group of people going with Dan undergo training in weaponry and first aid to increase their chances of survival. While receiving instructions from future soldiers, Dan meets Charlie, a nervous scientist who talks a lot. Dorian, another member of the group, tells Charlie to be quiet. Later, Charlie reveals that this is Dorian's third tour to 2051, which surprises Dan since no one usually goes back. They notice that all the people from 2051 are very young, while those being sent to war are in their 40s or older. Speculating that it's to avoid a time paradox, they're informed that the White Spikes that they're fighting rest every 6 days, which the future soldiers call the Sabbath. That's when they send new troops to the future and bring back those who've already been sent. This means that everyone spends 7 days before returning. One evening, as Dan and Charlie were talking, an alarm goes off. The future soldiers shout that it's not a drill, and everyone rushes to the portal room. Dan asks Lieutenant Hart what's happening, and she explains that it's the last research facility in 2051, which is under attack, and losing it would mean losing the war. They enter the portal room, and as the gateway powers up, Dan shows Charlie how to disable the safety on his weapon. People start getting pulled into the portal, but an error occurs with the landing coordinates. Dan, Charlie, and Dorian end up falling from the sky. Luckily, they land in a pool on top of a skyscraper, while others were not as fortunate. Dan quickly gets out of the water, checks his gun, and goes to the rooftop to witness the ruined city of Miami. The team is significantly reduced in numbers, and while the military investigates the time jump error, Romeo commands contacts Dan, recognizing his military background. They inform him that they plan to bomb the area due to the high number of white spikes. Dan is tasked with leading a combat search and rescue operation to save stranded scientists in a nearby building surrounded by white spikes. He gathers all non-disabled team members on the roof, and they make their way to the building, cautiously avoiding dead soldiers along the way. The team reaches the building and goes inside while trying to locate the scientists. Romeo commands warns Dan that the white spikes can detect blood from a distance and advises caution. They eventually find the science team all deceased, and Romeo command then instructs them to retrieve hard drives and biosamples from the lab. As they search, Nora and Cone alert them of the approaching white spikes. Dan finds the vitals with samples and learns that aircrafts are set to bomb the area in 6 minutes. He directs Cone and Nora to meet on the 7th floor, and they quickly head to a rear stairwell to escape the building and evade the white spikes. Inside the stairwell, they hear strange noises and are suddenly attacked by the white spikes. While attempting to flee, the team faces a series of challenges, including a failed rescue attempt by Humvees and an airstrike as well. During the chaos, Cone and Nora sacrifice themselves to delay the white spikes, allowing the rest of the team to escape. The next day, Dan wakes up at a military base in the Caribbean with Charlie and Dorian, realizing that they're the only survivors. Dan questions Dorian about a white spike claw he hears, and Dorian reveals that he will die of cancer in 6 months, a fate that he learned when he was drafted. He also shares that he keeps returning to the future because he wants to die on his own terms, and to Dan's surprise, he's summoned to meet Romeo Command, who turns out to be Colonel Murray Forster, his daughter. She explains that she brought him there not for a reunion, but to assist with a critical task. In a military tent, Murray reveals that they have developed a toxin that kills male white spikes but not females. They plan to catch a female to create a toxin that can eliminate all white spikes, and Dan is asked to help. During a helicopter journey to a white spike nest, Murray shares a history of the white spike's sudden appearance and their global spread. Dan inquires about their family's fate, but Murray avoids the topic. At the nest, the team attempts to capture a female white spike, but chaos ensues, leading to a dangerous confrontation. Dan and Murray manage to secure the white spike in a cage, but more white spike arrives, forcing them to fight their way out. Murray reveals the painful truth about their family's past, and Dan is left speechless and disheartened. As they work on synthesizing a toxin, Murray explains that they're running out of time and resources, and she needs Dan to take the toxin back to her time to prevent the war from happening. As they finish their conversation, the computer confirms the successful creation of the toxin, but the base is breached by white spikes. Dan and Murray fight their way to the helicopter pad, but Murray is injured, and Dan and Murray fight to reach safety. However, Murray is wounded, and Dan helps her walk as they both struggle to survive. At the same time, a voice from the facility's speakers informs them that there are only 3 minutes left until the time jumpers are sent back. Murray falls down in pain, bleeding heavily, and tells Dan that she can't walk and he should leave her behind. However, he refuses to abandon her, and Murray apologizes and expresses her happiness at having seen him this way, reminiscent of when she was young. Dan becomes filled with despair and sadness as he realizes that there is less than a minute until he is sent back. Murray hands him a vial containing a toxin, and suddenly, the white spike creature appears and tries to attack them. The floor gives way, causing the white spike and Murray to slide toward the edge, and in a desperate move, Dan jumps and catches her, but his grip slides and she falls. Overwhelmed by desperation, Dan leaps after her, only to be teleported back in the middle of his jump. He wakes up in 2022, clutching the vial of toxin tightly in his hand. He informs Lieutenant Hart, who is present, and they need to produce the toxin in large quantities and send it back to the future. However, she informs him that the portal in the future is no longer functioning and no one can return. He notices Charlie, who's also made it back, and when he arrives home, he embraces his young daughter, little Murray. That night, Dan explains to Emmy, his wife, that he met Murray in the future and that they worked together to create the toxin. He reveals that nobody knew where the white spikes came from, and they simply appeared in 2048. When Emmy suggests that the aliens may have arrived years earlier, a realization dawns on Dan, and Dan seeks out Dorian, who also made it back, and asks for his help in finding a solution to prevent the war and uncover the origins of the white spikes. They examine the white spike claw that Dorian possesses, and together with Charlie, they analyze it and they discover a volcanic ash on the claw, originating from China rather than Russia. Dan is puzzled how the volcanic ash from China could end up in Russia, and Charlie suggests finding a volcano expert, and Dan remembers one. They then visit Dan's biology classroom and consult Martin, the expert. They inquire how a creature from Russia could have ash from China beneath its claws, and Martin explains that the ash must be from the Millennium eruption that occurred 1,000 years ago. Ash from the eruption can still be found deep within the ice in northern Russia, and the team realizes that the white spikes must have arrived during the eruption and became frozen in the ice. They simulate the melting of the ice in Russia and discover that all the ice will have disappeared by 2048. After their discovery, they request finding from the US Air Force for a secret mission to Russia, but the request is denied. James agrees immediately and they load a plane, and Lieutenant Hart joins them, bringing along as much newly produced toxin as she can. Upon reaching northern Russia, their suspected location of the white spikes, they travel on snowmobiles. Suddenly, they encounter interference that renders their instruments and compasses useless. They detonate the ice and find a crack, leading to a large vessel trapped within it. They create an opening with a metal saw and instruct James and Charlie, who remain outside, to shoot anything that emerges. They enter the vessel and discover an alien race that was not composed of white spikes, and they continue exploring and eventually come across a compartment containing multiple white spikes, indicating that they're a cargo. As they inject some of the white spikes with lethal toxin, the others begin awakening. Before they can inject them all, several break free and start heading toward the exit, and Dan instructs Charlie and James to be prepared as they manage to stop 3 of the white spikes as they emerge. However, one manages to escape. The team inside the vessel retrieves C4 explosives as a contingency plan, while Dorian gives Dan his white spike claw, and he urges Dan to save his daughter and track down the escaped white spike. In a final act of sacrifice, the team inside the vessel detonates all the C4 explosives, and the ship explodes, killing all the white spikes within it. Dan reunites with James and Charlie, who inform him that the escaped white spike was a large female that they must stop. Dan and his father embark on separate snowmobiles, tracking the footprints left in the snow. Shortly after, Dan witnesses the white spike charging toward his father, intending to attack. Fortunately, James has set up a trap, causing the white spike to bite a dummy, allowing James to shoot it from a safe distance. However, the white spike becomes relentless and continues its pursuit. Just before it reaches James, Dan strikes it with his snowmobile. Together, they shoot at the white spike, forcing it to retreat until it falls off the ledge. They realize that it's not dead, and suddenly it reappears and attacks them, and it shoots Dan in the leg, but both Dan and James manage to blind it before it gets too close. Dan injects the toxin into the white spike's arm, believing it to be the end. However, the white spike bites off its own arm, halting the toxin's effect. It shifts its focus to Dan, but James selflessly cuts off his own hand to divert its attention, as the white spike is attracted to the smell of blood. Not wanting to lose his father, James jumps onto the white spike and stabs it with Dorian's claw. Finally, he retrieves another dose of the toxin and injects it into the white spike's mouth, kicking it off the ledge, ultimately killing it. Exhausted, they collapse onto the snow and Charlie joins them, and in the final scene, Dan returns home and embraces his family tightly. This time around, he also allows his father to meet with his granddaughter, and the movie concludes with Dan's voice expressing his commitment to never leave his family and to keep them safe as long as he lives. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch our next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you on the next one.